I'm going to answer the question, what is bioethics? And I think what I'm going to do looks at these kind of misconceptions about what bioethics is or isn't, that I guess most of us have worked out for ourselves, but when we go to meetings that are of bioethics issues, we often find that that's what people are arguing about. They're not actually getting to the nitty-gritty of what we're supposed to be there for. I've also found this really useful to do when dealing with students, so we really know when we're starting on a course what we mean by bioethics. So it's a kind of very, almost going back to basics talk that I hope will be a really useful resource for the project, and as it's being videoed and used online, I hope that's how it will work. So it's important that you know that my background is in philosophy for this talk, to understand where I'm coming from. And just a few things that I've been doing there. I'm writing short courses at the moment that try and get this kind of work over to people that don't have a background in any of the things like philosophy. Where this particular work came from, although I'd been thinking about it a lot and working it through for myself, was Soren Holm had a project, European project, about the use of empirical methods in bioethics about 10 years ago, I think now. And it was a multinational, multidisciplinary group of academics. And the aim was to explore the relationship between empirical research and bioethics. But what we actually found happening in the first few meetings was that everybody was arguing about whether they were a bioethicist or not. So the kind of focus on empirical work actually wasn't happening. We weren't dealing with the nitty-gritty of the subject. So we'd got sociologists there saying we're bioethicists, and then on the other side usually philosophers saying, well, you can't be because you're doing something completely different. And we were just going around in circles with these meetings and not actually getting to the point of where we wanted to go. So together with Alan Cribb, who was also on the project, we decided the best thing to do was to just try and deal with these kind of terminological issues that we thought were actually quite easy to solve, but really important to get through and away from so we could get on to what we needed to do. So we wrote this paper, and most of what I say this morning will be based on what this paper said. So when we think about what bioethics is, if you look on the internet and see all the books and articles there, you'll see lots of different uses of the word bioethics. There's been a running discussion of what's meant by the term bioethics and what the methodology of bioethics consists of. And bioethics is typically seen as a multidisciplinary area of inquiry with those from very different backgrounds engaged in the area. So philosophers, healthcare professionals, life scientists, theologians, lawyers, economists, psychologists, sociologists, anthropologists, historians, all the sort of people that are often sitting in a room calling themselves bioethicists and doing what they believe to be bioethics. But at least in my experience, many moral philosophers see the methodologies of moral philosophy as central and essential to bioethics. However, as I've said, others from other disciplines, such as sociology and history and all the other people that I've mentioned, also believe themselves to be bioethicists, and that they're using their own methodology to engage in what they call bioethics. So to me, it just seemed that we were actually just talking about two different ways of using the word bioethics, and it seemed like the logical thing was to just be clear about what these two models were. So I've suggested that there were these two models of bioethics that I'll just talk you through very quickly. So on the first model, it's a very interdisciplinary model, and bioethics investigates ethical issues arising in the life sciences through a multidisciplinary inquiry. And on this first model, bioethics is truly multidisciplinary, where those from all these different disciplines that I've mentioned use the methodology from their own discipline to tackle these ethically problematic social and public policy consequences of bioscience. So everybody's there doing their own thing, but all kind of doing that in a collective way to look at common issues. And I've got a beautiful diagram to try and show how this is. There's nobody more important than anybody. It's like the spokes of a wheel. everybody's working on these issues, working together, all coming together to look at the issues themselves. And I'm going to call this first model interdisciplinary bioethics. But then we've got this second model of bioethics. And here, bioethics investigates all these ethical issues by applying the principles of moral philosophy to these issues. So it's not about different disciplines coming along, it's about applying moral philosophy to these issues. So on this second model, while there's a wide range of disciplines actively involved in bioethics, the central method of bioethics is moral philosophy. So on this model, bioethics, rather than being multidisciplinary, is a branch of applied ethics and is characteristically informed by multidisciplinary expertise and findings, but actually has the methodology of moral philosophy running right through the centre of it. And I like the way that Ronald Green described this, and I'll show you how I've tried to represent this in a diagram. And he said that while ethics and moral philosophy may sometimes represent a relatively small part of the actual work done of bioethics, they form, in a sense, the confluence to which the larger and smaller tributaries lead. And more than any other single approach, the methods of ethics and philosophy remain indispensable to this domain of inquiry. So, in my diagram of this model 2 of bioethics, you can see that there is one method that is seen as the most central in this. So the moral philosophers are there doing all the real work, and everybody else is just feeding their information in for them to do this work. And this is the second model as I see it. And I call that philosophical bioethics. And that's the kind of bioethics that I guess I teach when I'm teaching the people on the PhD, the MA. That's the kind of thing that I'm doing, because we all base our work on moral philosophy, and I am a moral philosopher. But it's important to be clear about that's what I'm doing in the first place, otherwise it is very confusing. So, why do the moral philosophers see their discipline as being the central tool in problem solving in bioethics? Now, is it that they're arrogant or self-important? Well, hopefully not really. But it's in the name, and as Ruth said earlier, it's the name bioethics. It's the ethics part of the name that is making this different way of looking at this discipline. So if we look at ethics itself, if you ask people what is ethics, you're likely to get a huge number of different replies. Most will agree that ethics or morality has to do with the question of how we should behave, what choices we should make about how we live our lives. However, where individuals believe they can find the answers to the questions, how should we behave, may differ greatly, and typically include reference to religions, intuitive feelings, to professional codes of practice, to laws and policy, to cultural norms, and even public opinion. But there's also a distinct academic discipline of ethics as a subset of philosophy. And according to this discipline, there's a very specific way of reaching the answers to the questions about how we should behave. And this involves developing skills of evaluating ethical arguments in order to clarify ethical issues and come to a conclusion about these ethical issues. That's based on reason, reflection, rather than intuition or unquestioned acceptance of rules passed down by others. So it's almost the complete opposite of the first answer. Some people do look towards codes of practice, to law, to asking people what they think about things, and that's the way they feel that they're going to find out what the right thing to do is. Whereas moral philosophers, on the other hand, seem to think that that's not the way of doing it. All those things won't tell us really what the right thing to do is. You can only get there through argument, through reasoning, through these particular skills that moral philosophers have tried to develop. So on this second model, bioethics is a subset of ethics, which is obviously a subset of philosophy. So it comes down this philosophical tradition where what's important is argument and reason. And looking at the role of empirical